Welcome to the LDA Podcast, a series by the Learning Disabilities Association of America. Our podcast is dedicated to exploring topics of interest to educators, individuals with learning disabilities, parents, and professionals to work towards our goal of creating a more equitable world. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the LDA Podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Vincent Alfonso. He's a licensed psychologist, professor in the School of Education at Gonzaga University, and the second vice chair of LDA's Board of Directors. Vinny, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure as always. Thanks for asking me.
So to start off, could you tell us a little bit about your experience in early identification?
Absolutely. It was really something, that area I kind of fell into. I was looking for work after after completing graduate school, and I worked in a school district for a couple of years after K-12 school district. And then the school district I was at, we actually entered what's called austerity, which is just a fancy name for layoffs, and people needed to be cut. And so they cut my my hours, and I really wanted full-time work. So I called upon some colleagues, some friends actually, who I had gone to graduate school with, who had entered the early childhood world, early childhood education, especially young children with suspected disabilities. And then it was all on the job training, and I learned basically by doing. Had really not assessed or evaluated any young children. But boy, did I learn fast. and it became a passion for me. I mean, not only in practice and assessing, evaluating, hundreds and hundreds of 2, 3, 4-year-olds, but also then starting to write scholarly writing on early childhood assessment, evaluation, intervention, and so on. So I do have a fair amount of experience working with young children. It is from the past, but I still believe that much of what I learned in the past, and by continuing to read and learn, as a lifelong learner, I think that I'm pretty well tooled to talk about early childhood education, identification, intervention, and so on.
Definitely. So LDA advocates for early intervention. Could you tell us why early accurate identification is so important?
So I think we can think about multiple challenges in life. Physical, mental, otherwise psychological, medical disorders, and so on. Almost all science that's related to health-related fields indicates that the earlier the better, right? So the earlier we identify Alzheimer's, the earlier we identify different cancers, the earlier we identify anything, including learning disabilities, intellectual disability, developmental delays. The earlier we intervene, the higher the probability of success, whatever success means. But typically, we're probably not going to prevent certain things from happening, but we can certainly ameliorate whatever people are feeling and experiencing. And maybe, in some cases, we will be able to, take care of whatever the issue is. Certainly, I think when we intervene with students, children who are learning how to read, the earlier we do that, we do absolutely increase the chance of those students learning how to read, and then being successful in life. So there's research that's been out there now for decades and continues to accumulate that early intervention works. writ large. And that's why we need to continue to advocate for policies, for funding, for bipartisan support of early childhood education and intervention in the United States. Some people argue that Head Start was not successful. I would argue that it was and is, and probably one of the most successful early childhood education programs in our country. It's had ups and downs over the decades, but it's still there. And then when we talk about IDEIA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, a continuation of federal laws and regulations that began in 1975 for children, students suspected of having some kind of learning challenge or behavior challenge that precludes them from, learning subject matter, reading, writing, math, speaking, written language. That we are absolutely clear that early works, earlier the better, and I'm very optimistic that we'll continue to gather more research and also advocate through organizations such as LDA and others for young children.
Absolutely. Well, and you said early. How early can somebody be identified as having a learning disability or be evaluated?
So I am probably maybe a little more conservative in my thinking about this than some others. I think that learning disability, right? It's a learning challenge, right? So it's like reading, it's writing, it's math. Well, if you haven't been in school, it's pretty difficult you haven't been exposed to academic matter. And I'm very passionate about young children not being too exposed to academic matter very early on. I think that there are other domains of developmental domains that are as important, if not more important, such as self-regulation, attention, healthy behavior, independent functioning, and so on. I think those are all as important, if not, more important. But in our country, we have really, in my opinion, I think rather than helping our young folks learn, I think we've kind of taught them how to be anxious, and that we've pushed a little bit too hard for early academics. Having said that, I think that what we can do, instead of racing or kind of going too fast in diagnosing or classifying learning disability, what I do believe in wholeheartedly, and I think this goes along with early childhood education intervention, is we need to be screening every young person, student, child, even as early as, let's say, 2 or 3, and continuing on a regular basis, and identifying those young folks who are struggling and having some challenges, and then reallocating resources to and for those children, those students. And I think we would be in much better situation if we were able to do that. So I'm a big supporter of universal screening, developmental screening. I mean, we have babies and young infants, toddlers. They're all screened for hearing and vision and all kinds of potential medical challenges. So I think that that's what we should be doing for all of our kids, very early on, and involving the family, involving caretakers, and working with the families, especially families that come from low resource environments, and really helping them understand, the developmental status of their children, what they can, why we're doing what we're doing, what they can expect, how is this going to help them, help their children and them as they navigate through the educational system in the country. So, I'm the more direct answer is we really should be screening or doing developmental screenings as early as possible and on a regular basis to determine which of our children need help early on. If you're talking about a learning disability, an actual disability, I think if there's a history of trauma, or if we have chromosomal, data that, maybe a young person has Down syndrome or Fragile X or one of the other chromosomal disorders, then, I think we know a lot that those folks are going to have, some learning challenges, may actually eventually be classified as having an intellectual disability or maybe a learning disability. If none of that exists, then we're probably talking, kindergarten, we can start to see maybe some signs, but again, development is rapid early on. So, and there's lots of changes that take place from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6 years of age. And so, I'm personally not so comfortable with classification or diagnosis of a learning disability at a very young age. At the same time, if we have some clear data, or the data are absolutely, clear that there is a disability, then I would never want to not provide or have that student receive the services that he or she is his or her right to receive as part of a free, appropriate public education. So, long-winded answer, sorry, but it's not that simple, and there are people out there who think that everything is simple, and what this is not. And so that's what I would say: developmental screening early on, regular, follow the young folks who are having difficulties and having challenges, intervening. And then if we've provided them with lots of interventions, they continue to have difficulties, and we do a more comprehensive evaluation, and we find that there is enough evidence for meeting the criteria for a learning disability, then by all means, I think we should follow through with that.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned a developmental screener. Does that differ from a typical screener? Is that because they're younger? Could you touch on that one a little bit?
So for me, developmental screener covers, which probably should be a comprehensive developmental screener, although that might sound like not exactly clear either. But when I mean a developmental screener, I'm talking about multiple domains of functioning. So, certainly you could do, a vision and hearing screening, right? That would be screening as well. And that would be obviously assessing, evaluating hearing and sight and hearing. But what I'm talking about is, typically it's like 5 big domains, including either cognitive or pre-academic, speech language, or sometimes it's called communication. We'd have motor functioning, gross motor, probably fine motor as well. Something called adaptive behavior, which is, independent functioning and becoming more and more autonomous as our students age. And then social emotional functioning as well. So, interpersonal skills. So, we want to call it social emotional learning, that kind of thing. there are, many commercially available comprehensive developmental screeners, and evaluations. In fact, many of the tools that we have that are comprehensive have a screener built into the instrument, so that if you give a subset of items in each area, that constitutes the screener part. And I think screeners are great, especially if they have good properties, psychometric properties, and also that they provide meaningful information. I think that screeners can be administered pretty quickly, and you don't have to use a commercially available one. I mean, I'm also very supportive of local norms and local screeners. So in other words, a team of professionals in a school district can develop one on their own, administer it, and see how it works in their district. Because, there's this old saying that all politics is local. Well, all education is local too. So back to the commercially available ones, they do have these built-in screeners, so you can do the screening. And then if you find that there are some of the kids, have some challenges going on, then you can use the same instrument and go further and have a fuller evaluation in each of those areas, and you're using the same instrument. So you have a lot of consistency, I think, built into that. So I've done both. I've used commercially available. I've used district ones that the district came up with, and so on. Here's the challenge, and what I found, and maybe it's not true anymore, but I'm kind of clear that it is. First of all, we don't do it. Many places across the country, many school districts don't do screening. They don't do developmental screening, and they certainly don't do these thorough kinds of screenings. There are some that do, and the challenge there is that they don't follow up. So, okay, we'll do the screening, we'll collect the information and the data, but then kind of sits somewhere, and there's not a follow-up or a follow-through. I think the ones that actually do the follow-up or follow-through, probably have the greatest probability of success of helping these young folks be successful and learning. Even if they continue to have difficulties, we've been able to work with them early on, so that there isn't a domino effect. Because sometimes, maybe more than sometimes, if we don't intervene early and students are continuing to be promoted socially or otherwise, but they're not doing well, there's a greater probability that they're going to be turned off to school, and they're not going to like school. And then it's like the hole gets deeper and deeper, and then that makes it more and more difficult to help. And then it's not uncommon for students with learning disabilities to also have social emotional challenges because of that. So again, the earlier the better. We know what to do. I just don't always understand why we're not doing it.
Yeah. Well, did we always know that we could identify LD this early? Could you touch on some of the research that has been surrounding early identification?
Sure. So, I mean, it's really not that long that we've even had IDEIA, or it's, really the precursor, which was 1975. So if you think about it, what are we, 25, 45, 47 years into, free appropriate public education. And it wasn't until 1986 that we were looking at the toddler ages, 3 to 5. And it wasn't until 1990 that we were looking birth to 3. So we have not been inclusive until really pretty recently. And so we kind of, other than Head Start and then early Head Start, we really weren't, in my opinion, paying that much attention to the youngest members of our society. And I think we're paying a lot more attention now, and that's a great thing. And Part C of the Federal Law and Regulations, IDEIA, addresses early childhood, and there's a child find component to it, and so on. So I think we're much more attuned to young children and what's going on. But we're still learning. I think there's a veritable just incredible amount of recent research and data from neuropsychology, neurology, and other fields that is really providing us with insights into the how the brain develops and the plasticity of the brain, and so on and so forth, and also a great amount of research on low resource environments and poverty, and how environmental factors, toxins that are in our land and in our water, and so on and so forth, that might be having a negative effect on the young brain development, so on. So there's a lot more attention, and not that this is always only or always about money, but the point but if we invested in early identification, early intervention, and so on, we would be, as a nation, we would be saving not millions but billions of dollars, because again, it's not just education in the school, but this is also the developing body. This is medical, physical, right? It's everything. And then the payoff down the road, because the longer we can keep kids in school, enjoying school and learning, then we increase the probability that they're going to contribute to society by finding work, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of common sense. It just makes a lot of sense to me, and to many other people. And I am optimistic and very glad that we are, as a nation, investing in young kids, in young children and their families. And I think we just need to keep doing that, keep doing it, integrate the research and the science, and also having a very, very humanistic approach. I mean, families must be involved. They must be involved in the early education of their kids.
Absolutely. So what are some signs in younger children that may indicate a learning disability? I know you mentioned it can be hard before they enter an academic setting, but in your experience, what are some signs that can maybe lead to a learning disability diagnosis later down the road?
Again, it is difficult to say. Again, I think doing good screenings early on in multiple domains of functioning, seeing how a particular child compares to other children his or her age. You also want to know, if you can sense or pick up, I guess one of the biggest signs would be speech language challenges, delayed language. I think that's a big one. Certainly, motor, really all the areas of functioning, if we see that there's some kind of delay going on. And certainly, I think, if there's one area of delay, that's one type of situation, right? If there are multiple, then you have another situation, right? And so, do I have hard data on that? No. But again, common sense, if there's a delay in one developmental domain, but all the other domains are okay, let's intervene in that developmental domain. Let's see what happens over time. But if you've got, a young person who has multiple areas of developmental delay, we want to pay, very close attention to that child. And again, I just think we've been, as a nation, used to bringing our young children to the pediatrician, right? They get their early, shots and vaccines and so on, and we're checking their hearing and their sight and everything. Well, why aren't we checking, early learning, behavior, social, emotional, and so on? So I think if we can engage in that, make that part of our culture and our society, the way that we work with our young people, I think we're going to be much better off.
Yeah. Would you be able to speak a little bit about the difference between the possible signs of a learning disability or ADHD or behavior that's just developmentally appropriate for a child?
Yeah, it's another challenging, I think, question, and especially for young parents, parents who their first child, or again, families with from low resource environments, and they may just not have a good understanding, but it could be for anyone, right? Your first time parent, you have, no idea what to expect. There is no book. So let's forget, there's no book on parenting and, not necessarily what to expect and so on. I know there's that famous book, what to expect in the first year or something, but I think, I get really passionate about this because I think some, maybe more than some professionals working with young kids just have too high expectations. And I worked in preschools for a long time, and I can tell you stories all day long about being a child advocate and actually engaging in we called it consultation, but I was just like fighting other professionals who I thought were just trying to make kids do things that's not natural for them. We had something called what was it called? Instructional nap time. And I was like, I'm really not sure what's instructional about napping and why we're forcing our kids to nap, because all that does is set up a fight with the kids or a battle with the kids. Other things like we're sitting around the table and it's circle time. One of the kids wants to stand up instead of sitting down. No, you must sit down. I'm like, this is not the army. Like, it's things like that make me absolutely wacky, and why do I bring those up? Because I think, what's developmentally appropriate. I mean, the kids want to play. They want to roam around. They want, they want to do what they want to do. I'm not saying it should be like that they can do anything that they want to do, but there should be some within reason, So there, at young ages, many disorders, if you will, or challenges that could be indicative of different, classifications or disorders. It's very hard to tell, early on. So I think it's, observation. So we believe, in a multi-source, multi-method, multi-setting assessment paradigm, right? So you want to see the kids in different locations, different settings. You want to talk to different people. You want to assess them via different methods as well. And then, gather all the information and the data. And I also think it's very critical to be communicating with professionals from other disciplines, right? So I'm psychologist, school psychologist, but, speech language pathologists are absolutely essential with young children. Also have a physical therapist, occupational therapist. You really do need like a full approach to, especially when someone is, a young person is suspected of having these challenges and difficulties. Rely a lot on the teacher and the parent. If they're concerned, then we need to start to ask some questions and see what's going on. But it is very common for us as a society, adults in society, to kind of have these rigid rules about how children should be behaving and what they should be doing and not doing. We apply the rules to young kids. We don't apply them to ourselves.
That's true.
Little pedestal talk there, but sorry.
So what is a developmentally based evaluation like, and what can a parent or caregiver expect that process to be like?
I think they vary, depends on where the assessment or evaluation is taking place. Could be at the child's home, could be in a preschool or daycare or, nursery or in different settings. It's best if the parent or the caretaker is around, in my opinion, and takes part in the process. Multiple domains are assessed. If you can have, we used to do at times, we'd have a psychologist, speech language pathologist, and maybe one of the motor professionals, fine or gross, in the same room, because we oftentimes were looking at the same kinds of things. So you could have like an arena style assessment. There's play-based assessment. There's all kinds of different ways of doing it, but I think involving the family, gathering information from the family, having the family a part of the process, multiple domains of functioning, using good sound instruments, then writing a report that's parent friendly or caretaker friendly, that's very clear about the interpretation of the child's functioning or performance, I should say, and then having written recommendations that are doable, feasible, very clear to the parents and to any other adults who are interacting with the young child. So I think it's something that I enjoy greatly. I miss it, and sometimes I hear what's going on in the field and it makes me sad. Either we're not doing good evaluations, or we're not doing them at all, or we don't always involve the families, and the families have to be involved as much as possible. So I think that's probably a overview of what that would be like.
Yeah. Well, to expand on that a little bit, we've touched on universal screeners, why they would be so important, and the importance of following up on those screeners and tracking those kids. What needs to be changed to make these early accurate identifications easier and more likely?
Well, I think, I'm going to say it's probably really good educational leadership. I think that, school districts, superintendents, and principals really need to believe in early identification and working with families that have young kids, and that universal screening. I mean, I just think it needs to be in place. It's done at a certain time of the year. This is the team that does it. It really is an investment, and it's really not a big investment, in my opinion, and the payoff, if you will, in so many ways is so big, it's so large, but it's like any kind of change is just, first of all, change is usually met with resistance. So you have that, and then even if you do have some consensus or critical mass of people, then there's all other kinds of I guess challenges that are there. But I have no doubt that universal screening needs to be a part of the fabric of the school or the educational entity. It needs to be a part of the routine, just like taking state exams or national exams or graduation pictures or whatever it is, right? It needs to become a part of the educational routine. And we can I think I want to believe that most people want this. I think that they're, especially now after we're still certainly affected by COVID-19 and the pandemic, and then you turn on the TV or the radio, and now it's what tridemic or there's the trifecta of COVID, the flu, and RSV, and I mean, so you have a lot of that, and we may be, who knows, we may be in for a rough winter in the country. So what's my point? My point is that it's very difficult, right? It's difficult education. Our schools, our teachers, and other people, working in the schools, they're the real heroes, in my opinion, and certainly many others, but they're the unsung heroes. And I think that So it's very challenging to change the culture to, include universal screening, or I mean, there's been a lot more like universal pre-K, and I think as the government and our USDOE, Department of Ed, continues to support early childhood education intervention, I think it's gonna be better and better. But I just have no doubt that we need to do early, regular screening and intervention to to help those kids, but also to alleviate the pressures on the systems later on, because they only become greater and greater, and it becomes more and more difficult to help those students enjoy school and see the benefits of continuing in school. Otherwise, there's a likelihood of dropping out, and then other challenges that are much bigger in life. So,
Lainey, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your experience. And I think we had a great conversation.
Well, I appreciate the time and the questions. Makes me think. Hope I was clear, and certainly happy to follow up if anyone has questions, or if there's a need for a follow-up podcast or whatever. Happy to help, and hope people find some of this information at least thought-provoking. Even if people get angry, at least there's an emotional reaction, right? So I appreciate the opportunity to help out.
Thank you for listening to the LDA podcast. To learn more about LDA and to get valuable resources and support, visit ldaamerica.org.